All right. Good morning. The term biofuels is frequently pitched as a solution for climate change, but how much as the public do we really know about biofuels? And more importantly, can algae be a source of biofuel that can be a replacement for gasoline in the future? Good morning. My name is Sofia Zamora, and I will be presenting on the general concepts of biofuels and more specifically, how algae fuel can contribute to climate change. So a brief table of contents is that first we're going to be going over CO2 and its combat with climate change. Then we're going to be going over the types of biofuels and its limitations. And then I'm going to go more specifically into algae biofuels and its pros and cons. And finally, just a brief closing statement about biofuels in general. Starting off with CO2 in response to climate change, you can see from this graph, the gray line represents the global carbon dioxide amount, and the blue and the red bar graphs represent the anomaly of the temperature from the 20th century average. And as the gray line of CO2 increases, we can see that the bar graphs start getting hotter and hotter over time. This correlation can be explained by the greenhouse effect using the source by the EPA, which represents that the layer of gases that surrounds the atmosphere are called greenhouse gases, and it includes CO2. And these greenhouse gases, what they do is that they trap the heat from the sun, kind of acting like a greenhouse. So instead of the sun's heat getting fully reflected off, some of the heat still is trapped in the atmosphere because of the greenhouse gases. And this effect isn't necessarily harmful for the earth as a whole, but of course, everything that's not harmful in a limit can be harmful if too much of it is added. So if there are too many greenhouse gases, then the earth can be warmer than what it needs to be to sustain life. So now that we know that greenhouse gas emissions like CO2 could be harmful when produced in excess, let's see where the majority of the CO2 emissions are being held. As you can see from this graph from our world in data, the majority of the CO2 emissions are represented by the countries that are in a darker shade of red. So we can see that the majority of the emissions are coming from China and the US, with an output of about 5 billion to 20 billion tons of CO2 just in the year of 2021. But since we live in the US, let's focus on those emissions. And going over the greenhouse emissions by sector from the US, we can see that 27% of total gas emissions come from transportation. And of the fuels used in transportation, the majority are coming from gasoline, while only 5% come from biofuels. Now, this may come from just the convenience of having gasoline and the output of the energy being very useful and what we've been known to have over time. So we can tell that gasoline is what is used in the majority. Going over some biofuel types and limitations. The EPA recognizes biofuels in terms of generations. So we have the first generation of biofuels, which come from starch, sugar, oilseed, and animal fat types, and they come from sources of corn, soybean, canola, and sugarcane. The second generation of biofuels come from cellulose, so this comes from dried out sources like corn stover, wood, and straw. And finally, the third generation of biofuels, which I will be focusing on the later part of this presentation, comes from algae. So biomass and biofuel processes can take up many forms. First, biofuel in general would come in three types. So there's solid biomass, there's liquid biofuel, and there's gaseous biogas. And there are direct burnings of the biomass, which could come in campfires, or there's anaerobic digestion, which would produce methane gas when animals like cows are ingesting biomass like corn to produce methane gas, and that gas can be capsulated and burned. And there's also conversions to liquid or gas, which can be deconstructed or fermented. Fermentation comes into ethanol, and deconstruction can take part of high temperature deconstruction or low temperature deconstruction, and it can produce things like hydrogen gas, biochar, bio-oil, and fuels and chemicals. But we will be focusing more on bio-oil and ethanol. So some limitations of first and second generation biofuels, first are more land. So since we use things like corn and sugarcane, which are food products, we would need additional arable land in order to produce more of that for energy. And this would increase the rates of the food itself and increase the prices of the gas. And with more land comes more CO2 emissions for production. Since we need more arable land, it's possible that we would need to deforest more areas, which would release more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Next, it would be too much energy, since ethanol specifically produces a less of an energy output than the energy input that it needs for it to be processed. And finally, since many crops are being used, fertilizer has to be used for those crops, which would also contaminate the air and the water around it. Now we're going to go specifically into algae biofuels and their limitations and their advantages. So algae, as I said, is a third generation biofuel. It produces burnable organic compounds like lipids that can be extracted and then turned into biodiesel. And algae is a renewable energy source because of its ability to use photosynthesis and harness energy from the sun, which is a persistent energy source. Algae can be cultivated in different areas. So depending on the cultivation, it can have its own advantages and disadvantages. We have open ponds, which are the cheapest option, but they're not entirely efficient because they are open and they are prone to contamination and evaporation. Next, we have some photobioreactors. The photobioreactor on the right is considered more expensive than the photobioreactor in the middle. And these in general are more efficient because they're in an enclosed space and they're not prone to evaporation at all. However, because of the amount of material needed to produce them and the amount of engineering needed to optimize them, they can be more expensive than open ponds. And the process of algae growth is pretty complicated, but it can be simplified as cultivation and then processing into the biodiesel. So the cultivation can come from the photobioreactors or the open ponds that I mentioned before, and they would have an intake of water, CO2, and energy from the sun, and including some nutrients. And in the process of converting this algae into biodiesel, there are some areas where the waste from the process could be used to recycle nutrients that would promote further algae growth. And all of this is still being researched and it's still undergoing optimization in order to ensure the maximum efficiency. So some advantages and disadvantages of algae would be that algae can be carbon neutral, which is the most important aspect of it. Since algae is photosynthetic, it would intake the same amount of CO2 as it would output when it's being burned. So it would be as if the algae was never grown. Next, it could be cultivated in inhabitable lands. Since it uses tanks, it doesn't need arable land in order to be grown. It can be grown beside power plants, or it can be grown in deserts. And because of this, it doesn't need a specific place to be grown, and it can be grown here in the US. Since a big problem with gasoline is that we have a reliance on other countries, and we also have CO2 emissions from the transport of that gasoline from country to country overseas. So having a source of fuel that can be homegrown would minimize those transportation emissions and it would minimize the dependence on other countries for fuel. Next, for the limitations, we have high water usage. As I shown in the cultivation processes, a lot of gallons of water need to be used in order to cultivate algae. The good thing about this is that algae doesn't need to be cultivated in fresh water. So it could be cultivated in salt water or even sewage water. But depending on the water quality, it could have some optimization issues with the lipid production. And since algae requires nutrients like nitrogen and sulfur in order to grow, it would require high fertilizer usage. However, there are also some optimization processes that can use the flue gas or the exhaust from power plants, which produce nitrogen and sulfuric gases that can contribute to the fertilizer for algae cultivation. And finally, the most inhibiting factor is the high cost of research and optimization of techniques. Since it's a fairly new research that's still being pursued, big oil companies are less likely to invest billions and billions of dollars on the research, especially when it isn't going to give an outcome, a good enough payback for the foreseeable future. And now a brief closing statement is that although algae can minimize CO2 emissions because it's carbon neutral, it wouldn't necessarily reduce the carbon emissions that are already there. So referring back to the chart that we saw in the beginning with the gray line being going exponentially up, the carbon neutral emissions from algae production would give like a flat line to that gray line, but it wouldn't start going down unless we put in some other extraction processes of the CO2 that's already in the air. So for example, less deforestation and promoting more growth of trees, which would uptake the CO2 and fixate it into the trees. And by doing this and fully switching to biofuels that are carbon neutral in general, we would start to see a decline in the amount of CO2 emissions over time. And thank you.
That was really good. Thank you. Are there any questions for Sophie? You're getting a lot of accolades in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, Sophie.
Yeah, I can see the chat. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
great. So I guess if there's no other questions, I'll ask you a question. What do you think of using these biofuels as a means to combat climate change? Do you think that will really be a realistic approach, given the reluctance of industry to embrace this technology?
I think that with more research, this can be a potential for at least a temporary replacement of gasoline, since gasoline is going to be exhausted in the future. I think that there needs to be at least some sort of research in order to invest into renewable energy sources. Since algae is renewable, I think that it could be a good replacement for gasoline.
Did you hear about this sargassum bloom, seaweed, basically, that's gigantic bloom that's heading our way? So maybe there's a way we could harvest things like that.
Yeah, I was thinking that or I was looking at the different research concerning algal blooms. I think that the initial response to use algae is because of its ability to rapidly produce in these algal blooms. So it would benefit in terms of lipid production. I'm not sure about, I think that there was something on it, but I'm not sure about the specifics about using those kinds of algal blooms potentially to cultivate the algae for the use of those biofuels. But I can read more into that.
It'd be interesting to know.
Mhm.
Okay. And people are commenting about electric cars getting popular, which is another way to move away from fossil fuels for sure. All right, well, great. Thank you, Sophia. That was a really good presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Okay, so Stefan, you have to run a show. Who do you have scheduled or next or?
Hi, so I'm Ashley. I'm Stefan's student assistant, and his computer is not letting him into the Zoom at the moment, so I'll be helping facilitate a bit of the presentations. So
Okay,
the next presentation is the Aquaponics Club that's going to be giving a presentation. I think Jennifer Diaz, who's going to be presenting today, is already in Misa's class, so let's see, let me start pulling it up.
And you pull up the presentation? Oh, Ashley's gonna do it. Ashley, you're gonna pull up the presentation, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Ashley, is that link that you have in the chat what you were trying to share?
Yeah, but YouTube isn't loading up for me right now. I think it might be the internet connection over here.
My name is Karen Verde. I'm currently in Miami College, and I'm the president for the Aquaponics Club. Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Diaz. I'm also in the Honors College, and I am the vice president of the Aquaponics Club. And we're going to share with you just brief information about our club is, where our current position rated, where are we, and what we need your help to keep it running. So, what is?
Oh, okay. I have it here.
It's Karen Verde.
I thought that was somebody on the call. I'm sorry. Let me share this, and we'll do this the right way.
The Honors College, and I'm the president for the Aquaponics Club.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Diaz. I'm also in the Honors College, and I am the vice president of the Aquaponics Club.
And we're gonna here give you just brief information about our club is, where our current position rated, where are we, and what we need your help to keep it running. So, what is aquaponics? Aquaponics is a food production system that couples agriculture, raising the aquatic animals such fish, crabs, snails, with the hydroponics, cultivating plants in water, And this nutrient water has the hydroponical grow plants, where it's nitrifying bacteria converting ammonia into nitrates. So how does it work? Because that was like a really technical definition. So let me explain it to you. So first, we see the fish down here, all the way down here. The fish is gonna provide a lot of rich waste with, its poop, and it's gonna be really rich in ammonia. Then the water, the fish has its waste. It's gonna be pumped to the bed where we have the plants, and these plants are gonna provide bacteria that have ammonia and nitrates, and they're gonna fertilize it just into nitrates that are really good for plants. These plants are gonna use the nitrates to grow, and they're gonna purify the water. And then that purifying water that the plants are doing, over here, the stove right here, is gonna put the purifying water back into the tank. And that is gonna provide the oxygen for the fish. So basically, it's a cycle that repeat each other, and the fish and the waste is gonna produce the fertilizer for the plants, and the plants are gonna produce the oxygen and the purifying water for the fish to keep alive. Okay, so here we have some stats. So according to the USDA, more than 38 million people, including 12 million children in the United States, are food insecure. This whole project idea started 2 years ago when we realized that our campus is located in a food desert. That means that we cannot find a food provider or like a cultive from 30 miles from the location where we are. Aquaponics actually uses less water than traditional farming. Our aquaponics system uses about 26 gallons per pound, in the crops, and then compared to 650 gallons that are used in 1 pint of rice in the conventional agriculture. So aquaponics not only allows us to save water and be more environmental friendly, but it also let us grow safe, chemical-free, genetically unmodified organic food. And it also lessens our carbon footprint, which is something that we need to take in consideration as this generation. Okay, so there's 3 different types of systems in aquaponics. We have the no-till technique, the media beds, and the deep water culture. So they all come with their pros and the cons. However, the kind of system that we're implementing in our campus is the deep water culture. The deep water culture has a commercial stability, and it will be the most correct representation of where the aquaponics will be in the years from now. And after a lot of study, we realized this one is going to be the easy one for maintain and the most accurate for what we want to use it. Okay, so what is the water? This method uses the floating rafts that are suspended. So you see the plants, they're suspended the roots into the rich water, and then the plants of the roots that float directly into the water that are about 1 foot deep are the ones that do the oxygen. This technique, because it's not as advanced as the first one I explained you, needs a lot of filtration techniques, and we need to check a lot of the chemicals and the pH in the water. So here, as you see, you notice the type of fish that we want to use for our aquaponics in our campus is tilapia. The Pioneer Breeding Program is this program that developed the selected falls by unique combining high performance. So here we have a picture of the tilapia that we're gonna get is the Oricomis nicolis venal tilapia. And here we have our the company we're gonna be using. Our provider, it's gonna be the Branchmark Genetics. It's a leader for agricultural genetics. It's present in every major agricultural market and for a wide range of species. There are 5 in-the-house breeding programs, and they're focused on 3 main species: salmon, shrimp, and tilapia, which in this case, they're going to be providing us with tilapia.
Okay, so now I'll be taking over with some of the pros and cons. Some of the pros of growing with an aquaponics system is the commercial scalability that it has, its ability to be productive in warmer climates, its inexpensiveness, and it's not as susceptible to large temperature and nutrient fluctuations. However, some of the cons are the filtration demands, as Karen was talking about before, the demand in labor, which is why we so desperately need for more people to become active in our club and to really take interest in the club so that we can keep up with the demand that it takes. Another issue that we may face is space efficiency. We don't face this issue because our tanks are currently in the domes and there's plenty of space, but it can be an issue if you're in a smaller location, but that's not our case. Addressing some of the cons. While the aquaponic system is fragile, for example, pH levels, dissolved oxygen, dissolved solids, and other factors must be often adjusted and measured. These hazards can be mitigated through the usage of technology. There's pH controllers, dissolved oxygen measures, dissolved solids that will turn into sediment in which other aquatic life like shrimp can eat, and ammonia levels can be changed with the reduction of fish feed as well. So this is a campus-wide effort, so everybody can take part in it. Just because you're not a biology major doesn't mean that you can't also take part in this system. So engineers can assist in assembling this system. IT and computer science students can help with this facilitation of technological measuring tools, as well as the possibility of adding solar panels in the future. And of course, biology students can study the efficiency of the system and treat it like a real life application of what they learn. It would be a great hands-on experience. And in my personal case, as a business student, we can realize that there's money to be made in sustainable living and help with accounting as if it were a real life business as well. So here we have a picture of our old system. Our previous leaders really helped to get this system up and running, but since then we have renovated the system with the help of Antoine Daniels. He's been a huge help in this, and he's going to be a huge source of information as well if you choose to join the club. Here we have our new system. As you can see, it's in the dome. The reason that we have that covering is so that the sun won't hit the water so much as it'll cause an algae bloom, and that'll cause a series of other problems as well. But here we just have a video of how the system looks once the water is running. As you can see, we're scooping out a little bit of sediment that kind of fell in. That's another part of the maintenance, but it is easier when we do it in a group. So here is my personal favorite part of this club, Nemo. I'm very well acquainted with him. You can see his picture in the picture on the left. Here we have two small-scale demonstrations of how aquaponics can work. We have moringa in both of the plants, and what we're using as a soil substitute are the clay pellets. So the clay pellets really help instead of using soil. There's a bretta filter, and then there's a basket on the other side. Here are two other examples. One of the examples are the University of Virginia, and the other one is the University of Hawaii. Once we have our system up and running, we may be able to have, a setup like that one day if enough students take interest. So what are our future goals? Our future goals are to build a small-scale model for demonstrations. That is one of the goals that we have attained. One of our major goals is to provide food to our pantry. That is our #1 goal. And another goal is to engage our campus community. It is so important to raise awareness for sustainable methods of growing food. As Karen mentioned, we live in a food desert, and it's more imperative than ever to get, healthy vegetables to our students. And we also want to create an example of a sustainable environment. This is imperative, especially with the climate crisis that we're facing currently. So thank you everybody for listening. Here's a QR code with all of our pertinent links, and I really appreciate you all giving us our attention.
Yeah, thank you. As Jennifer mentioned, we have the QR code here down here. You can scan it. That's gonna send you to our 3 link. You can have our social media. You have the link for SharkNet. If you want to join our club, you can request it through there, and you can also join our WhatsApp group chat. We're actually gonna have a meeting in person soon, because as we mentioned in the whole presentation, we want to take it as a call out that we need help. We also are one of the few clubs in Miami Dade that provides self-learning hours. So if you guys need hours and you want to help the environment and also in our community, this is a great place to start. We need a lot of help. So yeah, everyone is welcome.
Did everybody get the QR code, or should I pack it up? We're good? All right. I'm going to stop sharing.
And hello, everyone. Mike, we are coming close to time. We do have time for one more quick short presentation that Ashley's ready to queue up. And if that's okay, I think we can squeeze this one in. And Ashley, are you ready to roll that one?
Yeah. All right, so this next presentation is made by this project that somebody at North is taking part in called Project Swap, and they're fighting against the effects of fast fashion. So I'll screen share right now.
There's no volume.
Ashley, if you could stop sharing for a second and then reshare it, but make sure that you select share audio. And while we're waiting for that, I had in the chat, there was a request for access to the recording of this session. So I put in the chat that if anyone would like access to the recording, please email me. And I put in my email address, and I'll share the link with you when I have it.
All right, so I think I turned on sound now. Sorry, guys.